Welcome to Tanakh Talk. I'm your host, William Hall, broadcasting live from Kingsland, Texas, USA, with another episode of Rabbi Tovia Singers. Let's get biblical Q&A coming to you from the Holy Land. Rabbi Man Tovia Singer, welcome back. Rabbi, how are you?
Great to be back.
Good, you're good. Good to have you back. All right.
All right.
So, anyway, let's see. Phone lines are already going crazy this morning, which is good.
Really? That's a good sign.
I've got a lot of screens that got covered up here. Let me reveal those, and we will get right on. We'll get right on to our first topic for the day. First question. Here we go. All right. Okay, Rabbi, you ready to roll?
Sure.
Sorry about running behind, guys, but we'll get right into it. Man, stop it already. Jeez. I keep getting the screen cover up. Okay. Yeah, it says call. Okay, call you live on the air. Please tell us your name, where you're calling from. The music's still playing. Hang on, caller. Where'd it go? All right, bear with me a second. There it is right there. I apologize. A little disoriented today. Okay. Caller, 1 second. Okay, you're live on the air. Sorry about the interruption there. Go ahead and tell us your name, where you're calling from.
Harrison from Concord, North Carolina. And my question to the rabbi is the characteristic of the shit, basically the personality of the shit. And you can see that in Zechariah 9, verse 9, that he will be riding on a donkey into Jerusalem. And the characteristic of him is he is humble and just, not arrogant, but a humble Messiah riding into Jerusalem on a donkey. And we can see in the Gospels where the personality of Yeshua completes that, because God says he is humble and lowly and riding onto a donkey. If he could address the personality of the Messiah in Zechariah 9:9, and then Jesus completing that into the Gospels, the same humble, lowly personality.
Okay. Go ahead and hang up now and tune in for your answer. Rabbi?
If only Christians read Zechariah 9:10 as well as 9:9, they wouldn't be in the church anymore. And there's good reason why. In Matthew chapter 21 and Luke chapter 19, the authors are careful not to quote Zechariah 9:10, only 9:9. So this is a very interesting question, but this requires a very simple examination. Zechariah 9:9 tells us about the Messiah coming, you're right, humbly, in a humble fashion into Jerusalem on a donkey, the foal of a colt. Okay, but there's a continuation of Zechariah 9:10, which the Christian Bible, the Gospels, are careful not to quote. And there's good reason for it, because in Zechariah 9:10, it tells us a little bit more about what will happen when the Messiah will arrive. And that is, the chariots of Ephraim will be removed. The horses from Jerusalem, the battle horses from Jerusalem, will be taken away. And he'll speak peace to the nations, right? And what will happen as a result? The rulership will be from river to the end of the world. Jesus didn't accomplish any of that. You can only say he came into Jerusalem on a donkey on his triumphal entry into Jerusalem, as we are told in the Gospels. What happened to Zechariah 9:10? And Zechariah 9:10 begins with a conjunction, and ve'echresi. But that's not the heart of your question. The heart of your question is one that I don't think I've ever been asked on air. And that is, the text says in Zechariah 9:9 that describing the Messiah, and you're correct, in this passage, the Messiah is described as oni, which means lowly or humble. And you're suggesting that Jesus was a very humble person. Therefore, his character personifies precisely what humility is. And therefore, I should somehow become a Christian. This should be very compelling. As it turns out, that is not the way Jesus is portrayed in the Gospels. That means in the Gospels, we can go to a Q source, for example. Let's go to Matthew chapter 12 as an example. We're told by Jesus himself that I'm so important that the people of Nineveh condemns you. Why? Because when Jonah came to the people of Nineveh, and Jonah came to the people of Nineveh 800 years earlier, the people of Nineveh responded. And here you have one, me, who is greater than Jonah. There is no passage anywhere in the Jewish Bible where a prophet so arrogantly says that I am greater than somebody and than another prophet. You can have God saying that Moses was the greatest prophet of all, but Moses doesn't go around saying that. Isaiah doesn't go around saying that. I mean, this is unparalleled. And in case it goes further. In Matthew chapter 12, the very next passage, verse 42, he says, the queen of the south, meaning the queen of Sheba, she rises up against this generation. Why? Why does she condemn it? Because she came from the ends of the earth to just hear the wisdom of King Solomon. She came to listen to King Solomon, yet there's one here with you, meaning me, who is greater than Solomon. Does that sound like humility? There is no parallel to this. That means there is no prophet in the Hebrew Bible that says that I am greater than another prophet. Now, it is true that the God of Israel will say that Moses is the greatest of all prophets and that he was more humble, but God is speaking. And God is speaking in Deuteronomy that no one spoke to God in the manner, the level of revelation that Moses had. But never does Moses say this himself. Never does Joshua, never does Isaiah, never does Ezekiel, never does Jeremiah, never does Micha, never do the prophets speak that I am greater than other prophets. So as it turns out, if we are to look at this is a Q source because it's in Matthew chapter 12, and you have a corresponding passage, it's almost identical in Luke chapter 11. Here, Jesus literally, we are told, this is a putative saying of Jesus. And the reason I point out it's a Q source is because the Q source, meaning the passages that are common to Matthew and Luke, more than 200 of them, but that do not appear in Mark, are very likely to be older than Mark, because they're filled with the putative sayings of Jesus, likely. So it doesn't mean this is authentic, doesn't mean Jesus actually said, that's pure speculation. But it's probably earlier, right? So what we find in the Christian Bible does not support what you've described, but I think much more importantly, much more germane, if Jesus is qualified to be the Messiah, if what he did is compelling, is consistent with the Hebrew Bible, I think, is to look at Zechariah chapter 9, verse 9 and verse 10. Those two passages are connected. How do you know? Because the first word of Zechariah 9:10 is v'hichresi, and it's a continuation. Zechariah 9:9 conveys the Messiah coming into Jerusalem humbly on a donkey, for sure. But Zechariah 9:10 tells us that the Messiah will usher in a world peace. World peace? Did Jesus usher in peace? Forget about Matthew chapter 10, where Jesus says, we are told that I didn't come to bring peace but the sword, to set families against each other. Forget all that. Did he bring peace to the world? Is there any nation, any peoples that are more warlike than the followers of Jesus? Is there any religion that spilt more blood than Christendom? The bloodiest religion the bloodiest religious war in human history began in 1618. For 30 years, Christians slaughtered each other. That's why it's called the 30-Year War, and eviscerated the Holy Roman Empire. This is your idea of a Messiah? A Messiah like this, we're not waiting for, we don't want. It's strange, incidentally, that you asked that question, because here we are in the month of May. Why is this significant? Because go back to 1096. It is in this month, in the month of May, that crusaders, acting upon their faith, launched the first crusade, the French crusade, and slaughtered the Jews of the Rhineland, slaughtered them here right now. This is your idea of a Messiah? That means these people firmly believed in Jesus. These were not liberal Episcopalians. So the people who were followers of Jesus thought it right to slaughter the Jewish people in the first crusade. That's the first crusade. People think of the Crusaders as those who came to Jerusalem to liberate the Holy Land from the infidels. But when the Crusaders thought to themselves, whoa, we're right here in the Rhineland. Like, we could take care of them here. And they did. And they slaughtered the Jews, burned Jews alive at the stake. This is your idea of a Messiah? Such a Messiah I don't want. Such a Messiah is completely inconsistent with the Jewish scriptures. And don't tell me that was the Catholic Church. Don't tell me that was Rome. Don't blame it on the Vatican. The Reformation, what a wonderful thing that was. Luther, I miss him so much. The father of the Reformation, who uttered vile screeds against the Jewish people that are unparalleled. Augustine never expressed such disgusting remarks about the Jews as Luther. May perish in hell. Calvin, his curses against the Jewish people will never be forgotten. These are the disciples of your idea of a Messiah. Peace, humility. The reason why Judaism doesn't accept the Christian Messiah is not because of bias, and we're not blind, and there's no veil over our eyes. There are no scales over our eyes. We looked into the abyss. We saw the church. We looked at the holy Jewish scriptures, and we saw the promises. Let us hope that the nations of the world will discover this. Look at Tanakh, the holy scriptures of God, and turn back to the true God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, so that it might be fulfilled what the prophet Zephaniah uttered in chapter 3, verse 9, that there will be a Safa Brura, that all the nations will speak in a pure speech. May we see that quickly in our time. Thank you for your question.
Amen. Very good. All right, we'll go and move on to the next caller. Caller, you are live on the air. Please tell us your name, where you're calling from.
Hi, it's Leo.
Yes, you're live on the air.
Hi. In Ezra chapter 7, there is a lineage from Aaron to Sariah, and in Chronicles, 1 Chronicles 5, there is a lineage from Aaron to Sariah as well. But there is a difference of 6 people. I was wondering why is there a difference there? Looks like Ezra is skipping.
I didn't understand your question.
So
you're coming with a massive echo.
Oh, hold on one second. You said, Rabbi, you're hearing him with an echo?
It's not just an echo. It's like just
a distortion of some kind? Hang on a second.
It's just like
let me try to clean it up.
Echo chamber.
Leo, go ahead with the question again. I'm going to see if I can clean you up a little bit here.
So there are 2 lineages.
2 lineages, right?
One in Ezra chapter 7.
Ezra 7.
In what?
There's two lineages mentioned, one in Ezra chapter 7, and what was the other
Israel?
thing?
What's Israel?
Ezra.
Ezra.
Yes.
Okay.
Ezra 7. Go ahead, Leah.
The other one is in First Chronicles chapter 5.
First Chronicles 5 is the other one. Okay. And you wonder
So
why
there is a difference.
Okay.
There looks like a gap between them.
Okay, and
I want to know. I would like to know if the rabbi knows why there is a gap of. I don't know what to think about it.
Okay, Rabbi, are you clear? Like totally clear on the question, other than the motive?
So we'll thank you for your question.
Okay, Leo, go ahead and hang up now and tune in for your answer. Thank you, sir. Okay, go ahead, Rabbi.
So I think I understand your question, although I'm not sure of it. We do have examples in Tanakh where generations are skipped, where, for instance, someone will be said to be the son of his grandfather, as an example. And I know what you're thinking, I think, and that is, why does Matthew then get off the hook? Why is Matthew condemned, whoever wrote the genealogy that appears in the first 16 verses of the first gospel? Matthew skips generations as well. The difference is because of Matthew 1:17. So I am just assuming that would be the follow-up question. If I could say that I am the son of Aaron, which I am, but there are many generations between us, what makes the genealogy found in Matthew chapter 1 so deeply problematic is that the author claims that there are 3 sets of 14 generations between Abraham to David, which is 14 generations, and then from David until the Babylonian exile, which the author claims is 14 generations, and which is not correct, and then from the Babylonian exile to Christ is 14 generations. That's Matthew 1, verse 17. Why is Matthew pushing that along? Because 14 is the gematria, meaning each letter in the Hebrew alphabet has a numerical value. And therefore the name David, Daled Vav Daled, 464 is 14. So the author of Matthew is seeking to convey that it's not this genealogy is not an accident, but it's 14, 14, 14. David, 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 royalty. It's 7 times 2, the ultimate perfection. That's what makes Matthew's genealogy so problematic. It's the verse 17. If Matthew had not done that and a whole bunch of other stuff, no one would have a problem with Matthew skipping generations. That would happen all over the place. It's Matthew making the claim that royalty is established in every section, 3 sections of Jesus' putative genealogy. There is, of course, another massive problem, and that is the genealogy we're told about in the book of Matthew is that of Joseph, not of Jesus. There are other problems with it. The fact that there are only 13 generations covering the span of time of about 500 years, from Babylonian exile to Jesus, 13 generations, that means you're assigning essentially something like 45 years to a generation. That makes no sense. Luke's genealogy is problematic, but at least Luke had the brains to not put in 41 generations, because Matthew's really 41 as it reads, but 56 instead. So it's more reasonable. So that's the issue. The issue is not all over Tanakh. I can give you examples where someone is the son of someone who's their great-grandfather. The issue is Matthew chapter 1:17. So I'm just sort of putting that in because I know that's the follow-up question.
Right on.
Thank you for your question.
Okay, very good. Good question. Good answer. All right, caller, you're live on the air. Please tell us your name, where you're calling from. Caller, you're live on the air. All right. Well, we're going to skip that one. All right, so guys, go to outreachjudaism.org to find Rabbi Singer's 2-volume book set. And if you haven't gone there, and I don't know when you've been there last, but if you've never been there to get the free audio, you definitely want to go through with that. They kind of title for title matches the books, the book titles and the track titles match. They're the same titles exactly, different information though, so you definitely need to check that out. So if you have the books, go get the audio. If you don't have either one, you're missing out. It's really good study guide material. Okay, caller, you're live on the air. Please tell us your name, where you're calling from. Hello, caller, you're live.
Hello?
You're live on the air.
You're speaking to me?
Yes, you're live on the air.
Okay, great.
I don't hear anyone.
This is Stephen Barrow. I haven't been on for a while, so you got to take my question, please. Okay, Rabbi Tovia? Is that okay with you?
You're live on the air. Go for it. That's why we answered.
Hello. Okay, good. Okay, here it is. Number one, I want to make a statement. It's not only what the prophet does, it's what he says. But okay, let's go to the snake in Genesis. Hello? Let's go to...
Okay, I realized why you couldn't hear him. I answered him on the wrong computer. We've got two computers, and I answered him on the wrong one. Caller, you're live on the air. Please tell us your name, where you're calling from. Hello? Caller, you're live on the air.
Hello?
Yep. I can barely hear you, just to let you know.
Okay. Am I coming through any better?
Rabbi, can you hear him?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
You can hear him clearly?
Sure.
Okay, go ahead and state your question, because I'm having a hard time hearing you, but Rabbi can hear you fine. And Rabbi, once you're done, if you don't mind, just please restate the question, if you don't mind.
I'm Paul from Virginia, and my question is what the origin of head and hair coverings are for the women. I understand that some of the Jewish women wear hair coverings, and I was raised in a Christian group that promoted that, and was curious, what an actual origin, how far back it goes. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah.
Okay. Go ahead and hang up now to me for your answer. Thank you. Thank you for your call. Okay. Rabbi, if you would just restate the question.
Sure.
Okay.
The question is, how far back does the tradition go that a married woman would cover her hair? Okay. So in Jewish law, a married woman would cover her hair. Okay? And typically, religious women who are married cover their hair. Okay? So the question, how far back does that tradition go? Now, a woman's hair is her erva, it's her beauty, but it's her nakedness. And therefore, when she's married, her hair then is only for her husband and, of course, the closest of family. So how far back can we trace this tradition? And the answer is pretty far, because it is even explicitly inferred, going all the way back to the Torah itself, and that's to the laws of a sota. Sota was a woman who was suspected of being unfaithful to her husband. Okay, and that she insisted on her that she was innocent, that she did not commit adultery. So as it turns out, the Torah says that you should, before she drinks from this water that God's name was diluted in, if she was guilty, would kill her and the person with whom she was having the affair. If she was innocent, then she would be blessed with children. As it turns out, we're told in the Talmud that women who couldn't conceive would do things to raise the suspicion just to drink from this water in order to conceive. But I want to set that aside. So the Torah says that, in fact, when this event took place, where she said, I'm innocent of this charge, that her hair was then uncovered. So the Torah takes it for granted in the text that a married woman would cover her hair. So if you're asking me, if we're tracing back the text, we're tracing back Jewish literature to find where do we encounter that a married woman covered her hair, the answer is really early. Goes back to the law of an adulterous woman. So thank you for your question.
All right. Moving on to the next caller. Caller, you're live on the air. Please tell us your name, where you're calling from. Oh, this is for you. Got
Can
you
you
back.
hear me?
I can hear you now. I answered you on the wrong.
Thank you.
Yeah. I answered
Thank
you on the
you.
wrong
I'm
computer.
persistent. Yes.
Okay.
I'm on my computer, yes. Can I speak with you? Okay, now, question. The snake in Gan Eden, it has seed, S-E-E-D, physical seed. The devil does not have it. The Satan does not have physical seed. So in my humble opinion, tell me if I'm right, the creature was possessed by the Satan. He had was any inclination, evil inclination. He lost his hands and his feet, became a snake. He was not punished for that because all snakes have the same exact thing. To show you that if somebody's trying to tell somebody, to do a sin, he's going to turn into he's like a snake. A snake, even whether he's a mason, in other words, a person who entices someone to sin, no matter what he does, whether he succeeds or not, he's still guilty. So what my thing is this: that creature who did talking on Eden was possessed only with a Yetzer Hara. He was not punished, and his purpose was to entice Adam to test him.
So what is your question?
The question is this correct, what I'm saying? I mean, it had to be a physical creature, not the Satan. It had to be a physical creature because the Torah is telling us that there'll be enemies. There'll be enemies. In other words, your seed, the woman's seed, and the seed of the snake will be enemies. That seed can only come from the physical creature.
Okay, so let's pose the question is, could you please explain in detail the role of the serpent in the Garden of Eden, Rabbi?
That's a very curious question. So, as it turns out, I'm not sure that was his question.
Well, you can reframe it however you want to.
So the punishment, the curse for the serpent is the serpent sought to essentially seduce Eve. All right, I got to set this up or else people are going to just find this very, very confusing. If you begin the book of Genesis with chapter 3, you're not going to understand what was the incentive of the serpent to seduce Eve or to disrupt the relationship between Adam and Eve. Okay, so in chapter 2, Adam was brought before him all the creatures, and Adam saw that none of them were compatible for him, and he gave them a name. If we examine the nature of the serpent, the features of the serpent, the Nachash, we would discover very quickly the Nachash could walk, talk, was highly intelligent, and was a connoisseur of good food. The connoisseur part we know from the inference of the nature of the curse, that everything will taste like dust, and was a connoisseur of good food. If there was any creature that could have made it, it was not the hippopotamus or the giraffe. If any animal had a potential to serve as a mate for Adam, it would be something that could walk, talk, think, and enjoyed good food. So the ultimate curse is that although the Nachash sought to disrupt this family and in fact undermine the parents of mankind, the curse is that there would be a deep hatred between the descendants of Eve And Eve is given that name, Chava, because she's the mother of mankind. We're told that in the Torah. So the descendants of Eve would detest the serpent, and the descendants of Eve would be able to crush the head of the serpent, which would be a fatal blow to a snake. Conversely, the serpent had only the ability to bite the foot of the descendants of Eve, which means to inflict an injury, but not necessarily fatal. So in essence, what comes into view is that you're right, it is seed, and zera means seed, means physical offspring. It does not necessarily mean sperm. That's a big, big mistake. Zera always means the physical seed. So it could be, in the case of Eve, her physical descendants. In the case of Hagar, in Genesis 16, it's Hagar, she has seed too and is blessed. So there is a scam going on when people where missionaries go, well, only a man has seed. In Greek, sperm, that's where the word comes from. Well, that's not correct. Zera just means physical descendants. So that's the nature of the curse. You sought this, the opposite would happen. Anyways, thank you for your question.
Is that me?
I don't know. I hear you.
Rebbe, is that you? Am I speaking to you, sir?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I posted this in the chat on YouTube, but I wanted to ask, I've heard, and obviously shows that I haven't learned enough, about the idea of years being put in Geniza. What does that mean exactly, and how does that affect the Messianic timeline? I've always wondered, they say Moshiach has to come by the year 6000, but if there are years that were hidden away, what does that in effect mean in terms of what we should expect with regard to the actual time when Mashiach has to come by? Is that affected at all? Thank you very much for everything you do, Rebbe, and I'll hang up and I'll tune in for the answer.
Okay, Rabbi, it's all yours.
Sure. So I do not believe that years were hidden away. So I could dispense with that. There is a view that it is an outlier. It's not a consensus view that years were hidden away from Jewish history. I don't believe that at all. In fact, in my view, that couldn't possibly have occurred because throughout our history, the Jewish people had documents that had to be written and had to be dated. And if they're not dated correctly, so the document is not valid. The most important of these documents is not what you think it is, but it is the divorce, as an example, which is most important because it severs a marriage and therefore unbinds a woman from her marriage where she can marry another man and not produce a mamzer. So it is not possible that years were hidden. So I don't hold that view at all. I think that there are some people in our history who try to work out, that I think where this comes from, is that there are people who try to work out the difference between Jewish chronology and the chronology based on Herodotus. And they're not compatible with regard to the Persian Empire at all. And you can go to the disciples of Socrates, like Xenophon. You can go to one of the greatest writers of the Roman Empire, Cicero. Both of them referred to Herodotus as the father of lies. And I think even some people in the past who suggested there were hidden years have later recanted that idea. So I certainly don't support it. So here, that's so therefore there were no years that were hidden. But I think what I've explained best illustrates why someone might have sought out that kind of conclusion. Anyways, thank you for your question.
All right. Okay. Moving on to the next caller. Caller, you're live on the air. Please tell us your name, where you're calling from. Caller, you're live on the air. Yes, you're live on the air.
Oh, wow. Okay, I just have a question. How can you say anything regarding Jesus, whether he lived or didn't live, by using fake documents such as the Gospels, which you have proven, in my opinion, beyond a shadow of a doubt? So how can you use it then to prove Jesus didn't exist? When, in fact, he may have, but the documents may have been destroyed.
Interesting. Okay. Great question.
That's a great question.
Go ahead and hang up now and tune in for your answer, okay? Thank you for your call.
Okay.
Thank you.
That's a really great question. Whoever you are, thank you very much. The question is, I speak about Jesus as though he's a historical figure. And the question is, on what basis do I think that Jesus was an actual, real historical figure, as opposed to a composite personality based on someone who lived at a different time? And in truth, I can't know that he was a historical figure. I can't know. When what I could know, and what any scholar of the New Testament can know or could reasonably assert, is what did the writers of the New Testament believe, or what did they say they believe? That's an important correction. I don't think Paul believed what he said. So all we can say is, or seek to discover, is what did the evangelists, what did Paul want us to believe? That is accessible. But to say what Jesus believed, said, or that he existed, we could say reasonably that that's speculation, okay? So it is absolutely speculation to say that Jesus did this or did that. You can have, there are methods that are used to try to gain access to someone from the ancient world and go, well, what was this person really like? In fact, as it turns out, all of New Testament all of it is about trying to figure out who was the foundling of Christianity. Who was the real Jesus? I mean, there's not 1,000 books on this, not 10,000 books on this. This is what everyone's trying to figure out. Okay, and people have very different views about this, because you're right. The Christian Bible is not just not a reliable source; it is demonstrably a source that deliberately engaged in chicanery in order to convey Christologies, alter texts, change passages, engage in fraudulent activity when quoting the Jewish Bible in order to shape the life of Jesus. And we could trace this very clearly, and I've been doing this for many, many years. And so your question is very reasonable, given that what I've just said. Then how could we even know anything? So we can't know. Like, this is not a science. We can't know that Jesus existed. We can attempt to use methodologies that are somewhat rigorous, like a criteria of embarrassment. We could notice that Matthew and Luke, as an example, worked really hard to get Jesus to be born in Bethlehem rather than Nazareth. Okay, so we could see that fiction in the infancy narratives of Matthew and Luke, that they want Jesus to be born of a virgin. It may surprise you that the notion that Jesus was conceived miraculously was unknown to the author of Paul's letters, was unknown to Mark, or Mark just didn't think, whoever wrote the book of Mark didn't think that was important enough to mention. You're arguing from silence. Yeah, this is too huge. And the book of John isn't totally not interested in virgin births, because John's not even interested in Mary and never mentions Jesus' mother by name, because John is interested in showing that Jesus comes from the eternal past. See the prologue, the first 18 passages of John chapter 1. So John just is not interested in where Jesus came from, not interested in the mother, and Mary is portrayed, is spoken of derisively by none other than Jesus himself at a wedding in Cana. So the question is, how could you say that even Jesus existed? So I'll give you two criteria. And number one is that Matthew and Luke worked just very hard to get Jesus to be born in Bethlehem, and they used two very different plot devices to arrange that. Completely different. They're completely inconsistent with each other. What is germane here is that Matthew's infancy narrative has Joseph and Mary begin in Bethlehem. That's where their home is. That's where Jesus is born, in Bethlehem, in the home. There's no inn, there's no manger, there's none of that in Matthew's infancy narrative, because Matthew doesn't know anything about it. Luke, in contrast, has the Mary and Joseph start out in Nazareth, and because of a putative census where everybody had to go back to their ancestral home, they had to travel to Bethlehem. So they're very, very different. And the question is, but they all want to get, both of these plot devices work very hard to get Jesus back to Nazareth at some point. In Luke, it's really immediately, meaning a month later. Mary and Joseph return to Jerusalem. She brings the appropriate offerings in the temple and then continues on to Nazareth. And incidentally, if you look at a map and you look at Bethlehem and look at the Upper Galilee and draw a line, it's basically going to pass right through Jerusalem. Okay? Matthew has a very different arrangement. When I say different, these are the most contradictory stories that are, you can't even, there is no real solution to it. Matthew has the family start in Bethlehem, as I mentioned, and then go down to Egypt. Spend a whole bunch of years there until Herod the Great dies, and then when he dies, they can't return back to their home in Judea, meaning Bethlehem, and they have to go to Nazareth, which was outside of the jurisdiction of Herod Archelaus. Okay, so they're totally different. Now the question is, why did they work so hard if the character never existed? If there just was no such thing as Jesus, there's nothing in the ether, in the background, that was a person who's really born in Nazareth. Like, why work so well? Just write the story that Jesus was born in Bethlehem. Like, why do you need Nazareth for? And it's very clear that everybody has Jesus as Jesus of Nazareth. In fact, Jesus is never called Jesus of Bethlehem. It's always Jesus of Nazareth and the Nazarene, right? I mean, no one says Jesus of Bethlehem. They're always referring to him Jesus of Nazareth. So it would seem, that means everything I've shared with you is pointing in the direction that this personality really came from the Upper Galilee, from a one-horse town. I write about this extensively in Volume 1 of Let's Get Biblical. So ironically, it is the fiction, it is the lie, it is the made-up plot devices, contradictory plot devices of Matthew and Luke that work so hard to get Jesus to be born in Bethlehem, but the family at some point get back to Nazareth and explain that away. Why are they working so hard? That would point us in the fiction, strangely, ironically, would point us in the direction that Jesus was a historical figure who got himself in trouble with the empire, who was from Nazareth, but the Matthew and Luke wanted Jesus to be born in Bethlehem. Why? That's no secret. Because King David was born in Bethlehem. See 1 Samuel chapter 17, verse 58. So Matthew and Luke want Jesus to be born in the city where King David was born. And they twist into pretzel, just turn themselves inside out. And Matthew wasn't reading Luke, and Luke wasn't. It wasn't like they can get on the phone. They independently invent two different plot devices. Now, for a point here, I don't think Matthew, like whoever wrote Matthew, I mean, who's responsible for the M source, I am fairly certain that he's collecting oral traditions from wherever he's writing from, and the same could be said for Luke. That means oral traditions develop in different parts of the empire, and then whoever Luke really is, no one knows. Whoever Matthew really is, but these are the people who are the final editors. When I say the word final in italics, they're going to be further editors. They're essentially writing down oral traditions that develop independently in different parts of the empire. So why do you need Nazareth? Like, why? I mean, Nazareth is never mentioned in Tanakh. It's never mentioned in Talmud. Like, Nazareth is really not a very unimportant place. If the archaeology that has been done in the last half a century, going back to the end of the 20th century, is correct, if the archaeologists who say they've discovered the original Nazareth if that's correct, I'm not an archaeologist, that's not my specialty, it really was a one-horse town. I mean, it was like a nothing of a town. So why do you need it? It just seems, so that seems to point us in the direction of a historical figure who somehow got himself on the wrong side of the law with the empire, and he was one of possibly 250,000 Jews during the first century that was executed, body thrown into an unmarked grave, and then later on the passion narratives or the resurrection accounts are invented, and Mark will blunder this completely by saying, because they have to figure out ways, how do you get anybody to go back to the tomb, and like, why would someone go back to the tomb 3 days later? So they come up with all kinds of reasons for it, which make no sense at all. Okay, it make no sense because there's no reason to add spices to a body that's been in a tomb for 3 days. So when you see Mark chapter 16, Luke chapter 24, just the opening, you realize, bang, the story is completely made up. So that would point us in the direction of a historical figure. I'll add one other part to this. It seems from Talmudic literature that there was a character who lived at the time. Now, people are going to right away be all over me on this because they will correctly say that the Jesus in Talmudic literature is dated to a different time, either the 1st century BC or the 2nd century, and that is correct. So there's one view that, look at this, that the Jesus that we find, the Yeshu that we find in the Talmud is really not in the 1st century at all. And there are mythicists who point to this. And that might very well be the case. There is another view, and it's not an outlier. It's a major view that actually it's all talking about the Jesus of Christianity. And let me just say that whoever this is, he does not come off well in Jewish literature. Now, this is not, I can't prove anything from that. So there is a personality in Jewish literature, really ancient Jewish literature, that seems to be speaking about the Jesus of Christianity. Fair warning, there is a position that this Jesus didn't live in the 1st century, but there's another view that actually the text had to be altered because the church was going to kill everybody, so we had to self-censor it, so that's why it appears this way. I want to get to this point. This is something I don't recall ever touching on air, and I think it's valuable. But you got to stay very sharp here, okay? If the Jesus mentioned in Talmudic sources is the Jesus of Christianity, it is very unflattering, okay? So it means no Talmudic author was looking to portray Jesus in any positive light. It's all very negative, okay? However, and this is what's very interesting, but you got to stay very focused now, very sharp now, because this is very tight, very tight. So listen very carefully. So Talmudic sources are hostile to Jesus, very clearly, if that's the Jesus of Christianity. If Jesus walked around claiming that he is the Messiah, then he would be a false Messiah. If Jesus walked around claiming to be a prophet, he would be a false prophet. And it is very clear that Talmudic sources were not being charitable to this Yeshu. And if that was part of his offense, it would have been articulated. What is very striking is that in none of these Talmudic sources is Yeshu, if it is the Jesus of Christianity, held accountable, is charged with and indicted for the crime of claiming to be a prophet when he isn't, or claiming to be the Messiah when he isn't. That would be a very serious crime, major serious crime, right? So the consensus, I don't want to say consensus, but it's close to that. There's scholarship basically weighs heavily on the position, you have to listen very carefully, that the Jesus in the Talmud really is the Jesus of Christianity, although at first glance it doesn't seem to be that because it's dated differently. But rather the Jewish people had to protect the Talmud, so they pushed it back or forward, okay? But if it is the Jesus of Christianity, so that means that there is no indictment in these texts that Jesus claimed to be the Messiah and he was a false Messiah, as there were plenty of false Messiahs in Jewish history. That would be a very serious indictment. And therefore, one can conclude that, in fact, Jesus never claimed to be the Messiah, and that claim was made for him later. That would be consistent with what we find in the earliest gospel. People are confused about the book of Mark for good reason, because virtually every person occupying this planet that has read the book of Mark, all 16 chapters, has already read the book of Matthew, because of the arrangement of the New Testament. Matthew comes before Mark. It's really an Augustinian arrangement, but everyone who reads the 679 passages of the book of Mark has already read the book of Matthew, and that colors the glasses of a person who reads Mark, because it's all colored with that. It means you read Matthew already, and people just read Matthew into Mark. And this presents an enormous problem, because Mark, as it turns out, is the most interesting of all the Gospels. I say interesting in italics. It's the most curious and also least embellished of all the Gospels. But it's certainly earliest. So the reason why this is very striking is that if you read the book of Mark and just push away the other three Gospels, it's absolutely necessary. If you're not able or unwilling to do this, you're just wasting your time with Mark. The only way you can approach the book of Mark is you have to jettison Matthew completely. You have to get rid of Luke completely. You have to clear your head of those two, the other two synoptic Gospels, and read Mark on its own. And what hits you hard fast, what's very striking about Mark, is that through chapter 8, the big secret is that Jesus is the Messiah, and Jesus doesn't want anybody to know that he's Messiah. Shh, don't tell anyone. Okay? So if you read Mark uncolored by Matthew, Luke, and John, if you can do that, so what's very striking about the book of Mark is that the notion that Jesus is the Messiah is a huge secret. Why? How did this meander its way into the book of Mark? It means, why is it there? Think for a moment. If Jesus being the Messiah is the whole point of the New Testament, what possible reason could explain that in the book of Mark it is portrayed that Jesus didn't want anyone to know that he was the Messiah, and no one actually knew? The only reason for it to be there is as an act as an apologetic, to explain away a problem. What possible problem could exist? The problem would be is people at that time, this would be just the most logical way of examining this. I mean, this certainly doesn't have to be this way, but this is definitely pointing in that direction. And that is that Jesus actually never claimed to be the Messiah, and that was a claim that was made for him long after he's dead. And therefore, it has to be explained when people going, he's the Messiah. That means the early Christians claim he's the Messiah. Other people said, well, we were around and he never claimed to be the Messiah. So then the book of Mark then puts in that device to say, well, there's reason for it because it was the big secret. Follow? So that secret, the Messiah secret, again points us to a historical figure who never claimed to be a Messiah, and that claim was made for him. Now, I can go further with this, because take Matthew 16, for example. At the end of Jesus' ministry, he's asking the people who've been hanging around with him, 1 year in the Synoptic Gospels, 3 years in John, doesn't make a difference. This is at the end. Who do you think I am? And nobody knows. Nobody knows. What? I thought he's walking around going, I am the Messiah, the Christ, the Son of the living God. No, nobody knows. No one, people are clueless. And it gets even more interesting. We are told in Matthew 16 that Peter then says, Simon then says, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. Okay? We are told that Jesus then turns to him and says, flesh and blood could not have revealed this to you. Do you understand what that means? We're talking about, this is like Matthew as an example. Matthew is saying that at the end of Jesus' career, prior to the crucifixion, there is no source which Simon, Peter, could have used to determine that Jesus was the Messiah, which means he didn't walk around saying I'm the Messiah, because then he would go, oh, of course, I've been saying it for a year. Like, of course, so the text has that buried into it. Is it built in? This apologetic is built in. Why is this built in? How did this get in there? Why not have just Jesus walking around going, I'm the Messiah? Okay. Now the explanation that would be most consistent with these anomalies. That's what we're always looking for. We're looking for anomalies in the text. I mean, if you're a geologist and you're trying to find natural gas, you're trying to find gold, whatever, you're looking for an anomaly in the rock formation. This is how scholars study texts. We're not looking for patterns. We're looking for things that stick out that don't belong there. It doesn't belong there. If Jesus is going around saying, I'm the Messiah, in the earlier Gospels, why does nobody know? So it would be consistent that Jesus actually never claimed to be the Messiah. These texts, which stand out, which are very striking, would be consistent with, in fact, the question people posed to the earliest Christians, and that is, why do you think he was the Messiah? He never claimed to be the Messiah, which would indicate that there is then somewhere back in the ether a historical figure. However, this is not speculation, but we can't know that. As a rabbi, as a person who loves Hashem, forget rabbi, as a person who loves the God of Israel, there's only one question we ask. Is Jesus the Messiah spoken of in Tanakh, or if he's not? If he's not, it doesn't make a difference who he was. If he is, then we should take it very seriously. When we scan the text of the Christian Bible, we find that there is no relationship between the Jesus of the New Testament and the Messiah of Tanakh, and therefore we reject it. But these are the reasons why people could examine these texts and conclude there is somewhere a figure who we could speculate what he might have been like what would have got him in trouble with the empire to get crucified, right? You had to be accused of insurrection, right? If you were a bank robber, that wasn't enough. You had to be accused. So that's how this is done. This is not science like you go to the doctor and you get a blood test done and they could tell you what your blood type is. This is not a hard science. History doesn't work that way. But I've illustrated for you just a number of reasons why one conclude that Jesus never claimed to be the Messiah, and you could see that from the text itself and then from Talmudic sources, if those Talmudic sources are really speaking about Jesus. And it is strikingly the fiction, the lies in the Christian Bible, in Matthew and Luke, that may point us in the direction of there was some figure who really was born in Nazareth, and that's why they both have to work so hard to invent two very different stories that get him to be born in the city in which King David was born in. Thank you for that very interesting question.
Very good. Very good. Okay, guys, just want to let you know when you do call in, make sure you keep your phone handy because there's a 10-second delay. So I don't want to hang up to go to the next caller if you're actually there. So caller, you're live on the air. Please tell us your name, where you're calling from.
Hi, my name is Danny, calling from Dallas.
Danny, welcome back. I have you on caller ID, by the way.
Thank you. Hi, William, and also Rabbi Tovia, it's a zechut to learn at your feet. Had a quick question. Just reading over when Moses is called by God in the burning bush, God tells him famously to remove his shoes off of his feet. So I'm wondering, in a place that is kodesh, a place that is sacred, what is the symbolism of removing the shoes? Similarly, I learned that the priests would remove their shoes during the service in the temple. So just wondering what that symbolism represents. Okay. Thank you so much.
Very good. Go ahead and hang up now and tune in for your answer. Thank you, Rob. Go ahead, Rabbi.
As it turns out, I do that every day. As a priest, when I am blessing the congregation each day in the land of Israel, I remove my shoes, as does all my other brothers who are fellow Kohanim, fellow priests. We do this to this day. We remove our shoes. And as it turns out, you're quite correct. In Exodus chapter 3, verse 5, Hashem instructs Moshe Rabbeinu to remove the shoes from your feet because the place that you're standing is holy. What does that mean? So I will share just one thought with you, and that is that what are we encountering here? It's the inauguration of Moses' 41-year prophetic career. Moses noticed something and stopped and paused and noticed something very, very striking going on. And he looked further. Most people don't notice the world around them. They may see something burning and they just move on. When I lived in Indonesia, it was a fairly common sight to see fires and smoke in all kinds of places because people burnt their garbage. People don't stop and stare. Moses did. Moses is called here for a prophetic career, which means that for 41 years, he was now going to devote his life to leading a nation. We now know that would lead us to the point where Joshua was going to bring the children of Israel across the Jordan. In order to be a leader of a people, you have to become a part of the people. Your feet have to be connected to the ground. You can't hold yourself aloof or far apart. So there are many reasons suggested for why Moses was told to remove his shoes, but I'll present that of the Sfas Emes, a great Hasidic leader. And that is, if you're called to leadership, that means you must be connected, deeply connected to the people. You must be from among the people. You've got to get your feet in the ground, not above the people, but deeply connected to the nation. And that's what is in view in Exodus chapter 3, verse 5. Thank you so much for your question.
Rabbi, do you have time for one more?
One more.
Okay, very good. Okay, caller, you're live on the air. Please tell us your name, where you're calling from.
Me?
Yes, you're live on the air.
Yes, I have a two-part question. One would be, where is Elijah at before all of the so-called Mashiach prophecies are going on? And then secondly, I just found out that the whole Paulinian thing was from the guy named Saul, who was also Roman. So it's just weird to me that people don't get more into it. You know, when I try to talk to them, they get very distant. So what you just said really mattered, and I do appreciate that.
I'm sorry, what was your name again?
Jacob.
Jacob. Where are you calling from,
man? Tennessee.
Oh, cool. Very nice.
Tennessee.
Welcome, sir.
So I didn't quite, those two questions are so different that I don't know how.
Yeah, let's focus on the second half, if that's okay.
What was that second one?
The second one, basically, just restate the second question differently than you said it, just a little bit, to kind of buff it a little bit.
The second part of the question would be,
just what's your
how
question?
Can
Go ahead.
When you know, because the Saul who becomes Paul is a Roman, so how a Roman going around telling other Jews not to be Jewish just seems very crazy to me to begin with. But where before you know, the Messiah comes, where is Elijah though in the Bible? Because you know, John says that he's not Elijah. So where is Elijah in the New Testament? If that's my first part. And the second part is, how does a Roman citizen try to convince people, you know, Jews not to be Jewish, and people accept that? That blows my mind.
Okay. Rabbi? Go ahead and hang up now.
All
Thank
right.
you so much. Thank you, answer.
I'm not sure I grasped the question, so I'll just
carry on the best you can with it. It's good. It'll be a good topic either way.
So Paul never claims to be a Roman citizen. That claim is made for him in the book of Acts. people frequently conflate Acts with what Acts says about Paul and think that Paul actually says that about himself. Like Paul never claimed to be a student of Gamaliel. I don't want to go off the track here, but that's a claim made in the book of Acts. Based on that means if Paul was a Roman citizen, you then ask the question, which I didn't understand. You asked the question of if he was a Roman citizen, why would he then tell Jewish people not to follow the Torah? And they were exempt from following the Torah. And I didn't understand why is it therefore. It's on the contrary. I don't know if Paul was really a citizen of Rome or not. I can explain to you. I'm not going to do it because we'd go on too long. But the fact that if he was a citizen of Rome, why would that make it less likely that he was really a member of the Greco-Roman world and a fully Hellenized Jew? Means it would then be consistent with his stating that the Jews don't have to keep the law, Romans chapter 7, Gentiles don't have to keep the law, everything. And Paul saying that the law is only a shadow because the essence is Christ. So that's really a Hellenized. That means that comes from a Greek worldview, that what you're doing is, what you're practicing is not the essence. It's really all a shadow, and the shadow is really Christ. That would be consistent with a Hellenized individual could be Jewish. So the therefore doesn't exist there. Paul, no doubt, wrote 7 of his letters. I think that Colossians and Ephesians could be added to that as well, for reasons that are not germane here. But if Paul was a Hellenized Jew, if he was a member of a citizen of the Roman Empire, that would be consistent with Paul's attitude toward the law. So there's no therefore there. I have no clue if Paul himself was a citizen of Rome. It's a claim made by the author of Luke Acts. But that would be consistent with Paul being a Hellenized Jew, and therefore, although while very familiar with Jewish texts, would have a very unorthodox view of practice. And that comes through in everything that Paul wrote and the letters that are attributed to him, which means Hebrews was not written by Paul, but the book of Hebrews is Pauline, not in language, not for a number of reasons, but it surely is sending out that same message. You can, compare Hebrews chapter 10 as an example with Romans chapter 6. I mean, it'd be very easy to make. So his citizenship of the empire would be consistent with Paul's view that Jews and Gentiles no longer have to keep the ritual law of Moses. So thank you very much for your question.
Okay, Rabbi, well, thank you so much for your time. Thank you all for tuning in today and watching. Be sure to click the like button on that video if it's really helpful for you. Subscribe and turn on the notifications so that you don't miss any future updates. And so also just want to kind of put this out there for you guys, if you don't mind. So many of you have been following along with me on Facebook and such, and things have took a pretty strange turn. I've been employed for a while out of construction, thankfully, getting into doing a lot of video editing for a company in Austin, and I was just laid off yesterday. I have a feeling it had a lot to do with them finding out about the YouTube channel, because it was a timing issue. Just so happened to be at the same time that a family member had said, hey, I subscribed to your YouTube channel, and then not long after that, they're needing a replacement. So I'm not really sure about that. All I just know is this. If you guys there's so many subscribers out there. If you guys would consider thinking about supporting Tanakh Talk monthly, like on a regular basis, maybe something as small as $10 a month, it comes out to like 35 cents a day. That would be super helpful. Doing the job that I do, I can't go back into construction because I've got bad knees and a bad back. And so doing the type of work that I know how to do, this is the only other type. So I'm not sure how long it'll take, but I'm going to be looking for a replacement job for this. So until then, it's just going to be, it's going to be pretty tight. So if you guys would have it, the extra, please consider that. That's all I'm asking. So anyway, thank you all for tuning in. And again, we'll look forward to seeing you later. I am going to take off the rest of this day. There's 3 more shows. We're going to cancel those because of Mother's Day. I'm going to take my wife out and spend the day with her and kind of just move forward. So you guys have a great weekend. Thank you for tuning in. Thanks.